Hi there. I've been talking quite a bit recently about fundamentalism and foundationalist epistemology, as I've been calling it, and I thought I'd just kind of round that up with a video really speaking to some of the motivations for this series, and also some of the kind of practical applications, if you like. I'm kind of motivated partly because I see a lot of discussion going on YouTube particularly, either in the form of formal debates or formal presentations, perhaps made by people like Saiten Bruggencade or Eric Hovind, Ray Comfort, or also by just regular YouTubers like ourselves, or just conversations between us. And quite often those debates, those presentations, those conversations reach a kind of point which it's not exactly a stalemate, but for me it's a kind of frustration. Because what I see is, for example, I see someone like Saiten Bruggencade or someone like Eric Hovind or Ray Comfort or some of us who I would classify as adopting a kind of fundamentalist position within a foundationalist epistemology, and I'll explain what that means in a sec. I see these people saying something like, what is the foundation for your knowledge? Or what is the basis for your morals? Or what are your morals based on? Or what are the fundamental principles underpinning your knowledge? And it's usually accompanied by a whole range of other ideas to do with, could everything you know be wrong? Those kind of claims are made. And I think it's often quite difficult to know exactly how to respond to those. And I get a sense of frustration from the people involved in those discussions, and I certainly feel a sense of frustration watching them. So I just want to, as I say, unpack some of what I think is going on there, with a view to potentially working towards finding a better way to operate in those kind of situations. Now, I think what's happening in those situations is that the person saying that kind of thing, saying, what is the basis for your morals, what is the foundation for your knowledge, those kind of things, that person is trying to frame the debate, as it's called. Frame the debate. Now that means to steer the conversation in a certain way, structure the conversation in a certain way, that allows only a narrow amount of possible responses to be made. Now it's called framing the debate because because it frames it. So I just want to use an example of how framing the debate works within another sphere of discourse, within politics, with reference to a chap called George Lakoff, who's one of the key kind of theorists in this area of how conversation works and how ideas can be manipulated for rhetorical effect, as I believe they are in this case. Now the discourse that I'm talking about, political discourse, and George Lakoff and others have made extensive study on this to show how debate can be framed in order to spin the conversation in a certain direction and bias it towards a particular viewpoint. And the example he uses, and it's in a piece of writing of his called Don't Think of an Elephant, and he's talking about the American political system, the Democratic and Republican political system, and how speeches and conversation, debate, within a political discourse, whether it be interviews on television or those kind of things, how that discourse is organised. And he gives one particular example which I think is quite illustrative, and which I hope I'll be able to move across to be able to talk about what I'm interested in here, which is this kind of foundationalist epistemology. What are fundamentalists doing when they ask that question? What is the basis of your morality, and so on. Anyway, George Lakoff, talking about American political discourse, he gives the example of a new phrase that entered the political realm about 30 or 40 years ago, maybe a little bit less. It was introduced into the political discourse by the Republican Party and was subsequently picked up by not only the media but also by the Democratic Party and entered public discourse at that point. It's such a familiar phrase that you will have heard it when I say it, and it will make sense to you. You will know what it means. And the phrase was tax burden. Tax burden. Yeah, you know what that means, tax burden? Well, you wouldn't have known what it means until it was introduced a couple of decades ago by the kind of marketing PR department actually of the Republican Party, who steered candidates into starting using that phrase, tax burden. is a very specific phrase. It doesn't sound like much. It sounds really obvious. But as soon as someone starts using the word tax burden, it frames the debate by producing images in your mind. It's a kind of metaphor, isn't it, a tax burden? It produces images in your mind of what tax is, what a taxpayer is, what the role of government is, what good behaviour might be in relation to that. Because just think about what a burden is. A burden is something that a person carries. There's no such thing as a good burden. Good behaviour is always to help someone be relieved of their burden. A bad thing is always to increase the burden upon someone. So the whole idea of a burden, of being weighted down by something, has all these what are called entailments, all this imagery around it. And so as soon as you start calling taxation a tax burden, you produce this image in people's minds of a weight on their back. Now, no one likes to pay tax. I'm not suggesting for one moment that tax is a good thing. But by framing it as a burden, it automatically means that any government who wants to, who says they want to lessen the tax burden on corporations, on small businesses, on individuals, is doing a good thing. We can't not think of that as a good thing. The conversation has been framed in such a way that relieving the tax burden is inherently good, therefore the person who's doing that must be good. And as I say, the Republican Party used that term. It very quickly caught on, spread through the media, and became part of the kind of public awareness. Now we all know what tax burden is. And it becomes so successful so quickly. And once that happens, it's impossible for the opposition to not enter into that. The frame has been produced for the debate, and as I say, it's very difficult to work outside of that. If you can just kind of imagine how it would look if you're in a TV studio, let's say you're a liberal politician, a left-wing politician, a Democrat or a Labour politician in my country, and the news presenter said, well, what are you going to do about the tax burden? What are you going to do about the tax burden on the citizens, small businesses, corporations? What are you going to do about the tax burden they have? Now, as a politician, you can't... I mean, what you probably want to say is, well, actually, we don't like the idea of tax burden, we want to call it something else. If you do that, you just sound slippery. It sounds like you're trying to spin it. But of course, the spin is already there. Spin is inevitable in these kind of things. So you have to enter into the debate. You have to start talking yourself about the tax burden. The debate has been framed in such a way that you, as a let's say a left-wing politician, have to buy into the vocabulary, the rhetoric of the right in order to just participate in the debate at all. You've been ambushed, in a sense, by the rhetorical effect of the debate being framed, in that case in terms of the tax burden. Right? I hope that makes some kind of a sense. Now, what I think is happening with a lot of the, let's call it the atheist-theist debates, but anyway, debates with fundamentalists, particularly the people I mentioned, Seitan Brookenkate, Eric Hovind, Ray Comfort, perhaps others. What's happening there is, when they ask that question, what is the basis of your knowledge? What is the foundation for your beliefs? What are the fundamental moral principles that you work to? What's happening there is they're also framing the debate. Whatever you say in answer to that is not going to be satisfying, because that's not how knowledge works, it's not how morality works, it's not how beliefs work. It isn't. It's framing it in terms of what I referred to earlier as a foundationalist epistemology. It's framing this idea that knowledge or morals are a kind of building which have to be built on these solid foundations. There has to be something really almost metaphysically strong at the bottom, an eternal principle, outside of any possible change, outside of human intervention, outside of the whims of individual preference or the possible changes that might take place within societies. So whatever answer you give to that, if you answer that question, what is the basis of your knowledge, what is the foundation of your beliefs, the fundamental moral principles you work to, is never going to be good enough. If you appeal to interpersonal agreement, then of course someone will say, well, interpersonal agreement, that just means you're handing it over to society, and societies change, and before you know it, you're talking about the Nazis. If you say, yes, well, these ideas are part of our evolutionary heritage. We are moral beings, for example, because of the evolution of empathy within social species. Then you're on the kind of shifting sand of kind of naturalism. It would be very easy for someone to say, well, so we can adopt the morals of crocodiles and who eat their young. Is that how it works? However you answer that, you're never going to get to the metaphysically eternal fundamental principles that one would require if you had to adopt a foundationalist fundamental principle, an epistemology built like it was a building. You'll never get there. But by taking part of that, even by acknowledging that the question makes sense, what is the foundation of your knowledge? What is the basis of your moral principles? What are the fundamental principles of your belief? Just by accepting the question, you've allowed the debate to be framed in terms of this foundationalist epistemology, this idea that knowledge or morality is a kind of building that has to be built on firm foundations. And even however sensible that might sound when people say it, that isn't really how knowledge works. Knowledge isn't a building. Most people who study the philosophy of knowledge, the philosophy of epistemology, know that that's a very kind of weak structure, very weak idea for what knowledge is. There's been countless hours of work spent on critiquing that model. So however much sense it seems to make intuitively, what's happening is your understanding of the situation is being manipulated for rhetorical effect by the framing of the debate in terms of this foundational epistemology. So whenever you're asked, if you are asked, what is the foundational principles on which your beliefs are based, what are the fundamental ideas of knowledge, what is the basis for your morality, you have to think, okay, this is a foundationalist epistemology I'm being presented with here. Do I really regard knowledge, morality, as a kind of building? Do I need certain principles which have to bear the load of everything I think and feel and know to be right and know to be wrong? Do I really need that? The answer is no, you don't. That's not how it works. There's better epistemologies, networked epistemologies, epistemology based in webs, epistemologies based in all kinds of things. It's a very rich area of study if you're interested. But my advice would be not to let yourself get ambushed, not to let the debate be framed in terms of a way of knowing which is bogus, and not let the conversation be spun in that way. Anyway, thanks very much for your patience with all this fundamentalist stuff, and see you on the tubes.